So, hello, this is Juris Kasha in Latvia, in Riga. Just sort of update those of you who understand English better than Latvian as to what's going on here. Well, our parliament, known as the Saima, has done a couple of things, one of which was a rather good thing. They voted a resolution in which they expressed support for a peaceful transition of government in Belarus. As you know, Latvia has more than 170 kilometer long common border with Belarus, and if anything really serious were to happen there, we would probably see, people coming across, refugees, and that sort of thing. Plus, the deranged person who is running the country, Alexander Lukashenko, has even sent his military forces to the Lithuanian border. Lithuania also has a long border with Belarus, like as if they were anticipating, the mighty Lithuanian army to march in there. Uh, anyway, that was a good thing that the Saima did. The other thing that the Saima did, sort of, as I put it in a column that I wrote for Delphi.lv, which will be published at some point in the next couple of days, is something that reminded me of my childhood in Boston in the U.S. when we were little kids, and this was before the time when everything was packed in plastic. And occasionally a tin can would fall out of the garbage cans along the street there in the kind of urban area in which I lived when I was a little kid. And then some kids would kick the can around on the street, sort of kick the can down the street, and somebody else would run after it and kick it further. Um, Sort of nobody, while kicking the can, nobody thought that it might be a good idea to pick the can up and toss it into a trash bin somewhere. But so how did the Latvian Saima kick the can? Well, the Latvian State Land Service, Valsts Zemesdienests, in execution of its regular duties, did a massive reassessment of land, so-called cadastral values. I don't know what cadastral means, but it is sort of the figure by which property tax assessments are made. So if you have a cadastral value of X, your property tax is then assessed at a rate of whatever it is for the kind of property that it is. And as I understand, there can be municipal exceptions for this and everything else. But the point of the whole thing is that this new reassessment of the total value of properties, both farm, commercial, residential, rental buildings, and everything, this has led to a sharp rise in a lot of cadastral values, meaning that a sharp rise in taxes or property taxes would happen if they were just applied across the board to property taxes, I guess, starting in 2022 or whenever this was supposed to take effect. Anyway, people quickly realized that there were people who would simply lose their residences because they couldn't afford the property tax on it, because the residence, in some cases, may be just a small shack or apartment next to a very expensive new building, which sort of casts its umbra or penumbra of property value over the neighboring buildings, and this whole value of properties in the whole neighborhood goes up. And so these people, low income people, would be forced out of their only home. And there has been a movement already ahead of this vote to exempt the so-called sole residence or only home or whatever, or to set some kind of a threshold for the value below which no one would be assessed any kind of property tax. Oh, excuse me. Uh, anyway, what the what the Parliament did is they sort of passed on to a judicial or judiciary, whatever, legal affairs committee, two different proposals. One of which would push back the whole property tax uh, implementation or the use of the new values to 2023, the other to 2026. So it was sort of a contest between two political factions as to who would kick the can the furthest. But now the can has been kicked down the road. Now, this is not to say that property taxes are per se an evil thing. Property tax is one of the few taxes that is very difficult to avoid paying, because if you are registered as the owner of whatever it is, usually a residence, maybe a commercial building, well, then you are assessed tax on it. If you are generating income, it would take an hour to describe the various types of fiddles and schemes and other kinds of ways that one can avoid paying tax on revenues or incomes in Latvia. Not that everybody does it, but there are still, lingering over from the rather colorful 90s and lingering over from the Soviet era, there is this kind of a sport of evading the tax collector here in this country, and it happens everywhere else. I mean, it's even in high tax and high tax high return on tax countries like Sweden. What do I mean by return on tax? I mean that you may be paying rather high taxes, but you are getting something back for it. You are getting good schools, you are getting good health care, whatever. Now, Latvia, well, it's still debatable how good the return on taxes here is. Anyway, there's that side of the property tax that you really cannot avoid it. You have to pay it, and or you lose your property. On the other hand, you don't want a lot of unfair situations, and you don't want to also grant special privileges to people who have a residence in Latvia simply because they bought when it was possible. I mean, to a limited extent, I think it still is possible. You can buy a residence permit here as a non-EU resident if you buy a luxury apartment or if you invest in a business or something like that. Not 100% sure if that scheme is still running, but there are people who've come in under it. So you have, you have an apartment building where somebody has a couple of renovated apartments that have been sold for like 500,000 euro, and then you have other low-income folks living in the same building. The value of the whole place goes up. The low-income folks get hit with an incredible tax burden on the property. So who knows how that'll all end. What the government should have done, knowing that this reassessment of property values would come, is to have worked out a system from day one that would say to people, look, you will have to continue to pay property taxes, but we will adjust the rates on these much higher evaluations so that nobody is hurt. Maybe you get a slight rise in property tax, but at the same time, you can justify that by saying, well, municipal services or whatever the taxes are spent for are getting better, they're reasonable. And then there is, of course, this yet again, the national hobby of reassessing the whole tax system is also in play right now, and there are ideas of cutting income taxes and so forth and so on, so that could be all worked in, where you get a slight rise in your property tax, not, you don't triple somebody's property tax because the value has gone up. You increase it slightly, and then you also cut the income tax that person pays, which sort of compensates. And at the same time, there is a mechanism by which if you have reasonable enough income taxes, that it will not be worth the effort to try to evade a low income tax. It is often worth the effort to try to evade a high income tax or a tax which provides little or no visible return to the taxpayer. But anyway, that's another issue. So those are basically the things that are happening. The experiment with, as you may have seen in my earlier videos, the experiment with closing down the pedestrian street seems to have gone off all right. It was it was not a big deal. It was not people swarming there all the time, but it was nice to be able to walk down the middle of a street and stop at a stand and buy a beer or buy a sandwich or whatever. That was all right. And of course, the municipal election campaign is in full gear. I've discussed some of the forces in play here, and of course, the internet and social media are becoming a battleground for this, with everybody, all of the politicians posting their little election trailers or election videos online. Not that they're not on TV also, but I think that we're seeing a kind of a fundamental change in the way campaigning takes place, and people are also on Twitter. Today, somebody had photographed a member of the Progressive and for Development for Alliance near the Soviet War Monument here, which is a controversial place. But it's also a place where there's a lot of traffic going by. There are people, there are trolley cars going by, there are people getting on and off, and there's, pedestrian and car traffic. So it's not an unreasonable place to to set up a kind of campaign tent or a temporary campaign thing. So somebody said that this proves these guys are all evil pro-Soviets. It has nothing to do with it. But this kind of smearing and attacking each other is going to go on for the rest of the month, presumably. And then things will really get interesting, because as things look, even these evil dudes from the for Development for and Progressives Alliance right now seem to be in the lead. But how whoever is in the lead and whoever aligns with them are going to be able to form a workable coalition and pick a workable candidate for mayor of Riga is going to be something that will probably occupy most of the month of September, if not longer. So there'll be interesting things going on then and there. Personally, what can I say? My son has started making his movie about rave in Latvia, or at least the young people who are the characters in the movie are sort of ravers, and so the film could be easily be called one about sex and ecstasy and rave music, instead of sex and drugs and rock and roll, which is the thing back in the day. So he's pretty busy with that. Matis Kaja, look him up on social media, look him up on Google, and you can see what he's done today and what he's now doing with his new movie. And we're still waiting for a possibility to release his Western, which he shot last summer, but which has, of course, been delayed by the pandemic. And so that'll be coming out. Well, we'll see when that comes out, but it's pretty much almost edited to sort of a high-level beta status. There's music and there's some technical things to be done with it, but it should be a good film too. So when it comes out, watch it, and I hope that it may be even picked up by Netflix or someone and dubbed into English, although it's been shot in 3 languages, Latvian, Russian, and German. So wait for it. Well, that's about all I have to say here from Latvia now, including this kind of house ad for my son Matis. So long.